Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to another episode of The Spread. I'm your host, Jim Sella, in studio with J-Dash and JK47. We're going to keep on keeping on with our fantasy football segments. We got numbers 151 to 175 if the pattern is continuing.
That's how we do it around here.
That's how we roll, fool.
But we're going to start with number 151, Darren McFadden, running back from Dallas.
How does this guy even get on the list? He's going to play 2 snaps, and you're going to hear something snap, and he's automatically number 500.
Well, listen, here's why. Because they have Joseph Randle, who I think is going to have a good season, but there's the possibility he just doesn't work out as a feature running back. And then it's Darren McFadden and Lance Dunbar. So that's all they have out there. Darren McFadden could take this job away and become the feature running back. But if you look last season with Oakland, he just wasn't good. I mean, I don't even have to give you the numbers. He wasn't good. He lost his job to Latavius Murray, who came in and showed, you know what, this run game isn't that bad in Oakland. You can gain yardage in Oakland, where Darren McFadden wasn't doing it. But look, he's close to 100% after having a hamstring earlier this year. He said in radio interviews that he is expected to split carries with Joseph Randle this season. So there's that possibility as well. But everything I hear is it's Joseph Randle's job to lose. Now, he is not 100% healthy either. He has an oblique injury.
Oblique.
He's expected to be healthy for the beginning of the season. I think Randle's going to take the job, but drafting McFadden at 151 isn't a bad idea in case it doesn't work out as planned with Randle.
47? Yay or nay on McFadden?
Nah.
Well said.
Number 152. Teddy Bridgewater,
Love this dude.
Quarterback from Minnesota.
I think he's going to have a big year.
I agree.
4,000 yards passing from Bridgewater. I'm calling it.
It's possible. That doesn't make him not worth 152. Listen,
no, I agree.
If he has the same year he had last year, he's not worth 152 at all. I think he is going to have a better year as well. He had 2,919 yards, 14 TDs and 12 picks last year. But he also ran for 209 yards and had a rushing touchdown, all in 13 games. And look, this is a guy that throws the ball. He had 37 or more attempts 5 times. He had 3 100-yard games with 317 versus Atlanta. And 2 of those came in the final 4 games. So you could see his progression towards the end of the season as well. All 14 TDs came in the final 10 games he played as well. And he had 4 multi-TD games in his final 6 games. So he just kept getting better and better later in the season. And with an off season, I think he's going to be a lot better as well. They brought over Mike Wallace, so they got the deep threat. I think Charles Johnson's going to be a better receiver this year. They still have Jarius Wright. They have Kyle Rudolph at tight end, who I think is going to have a better year this year. They got rid of Greg Jennings, which may be addition by subtraction at this point in his career. And let's not forget, Adrian Peterson is going to make this run game a lot better as well. So Teddy Bridgewater has a lot of upside here. But there's the fact that maybe he's one of those guys that take a step back in their sophomore year as well.
He could.
Well, I mean, what I like about Bridgewater is, as you said, how he actually progressed towards the end of the year.
Right.
He came in, he seemed a little bit clueless in a way, and then he just figured it out. And
yeah, a lot of people think Derek Carr is actually the better second-year quarterback, where I think Teddy Bridgewater is that guy.
The spread loves Bridgewater.
I just think that Bridgewater has a better team around him than what Derek Carr does, for one thing.
Yeah, I think so too. Number 153, Nal Davis, running back from Kansas City. Now, Jamal Charles, we obviously know, is the feature back out there. He had over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, had 40 receptions, and 291 yards in the air last season. And he also had 5 touchdowns in the passing game as well. This is a guy that a lot of people think is injury prone, but he missed more than 1 game in a season just once in his career. But Nal Davis is a great handcuff to have for Jamal Charles in case he does get hurt, or if you have Nal Davis and not Jamal Charles. I mean, if Charles goes down, Nal Davis is going to be one of the best fantasy running backs to have. And not only that, I mean, with Charles healthy last season, Nal Davis picked up 463 yards and had 6 touchdowns, plus another touchdown in the passing game. He had a multi-TD game. He had 2 100-yard games with 132 yards and a touchdown at Miami. As a backup, you're going to be inconsistent. He had 25 yards rushing or less 12 times, 11 times in his final 12 games. So, I mean, it's somewhat of a risky pick, but I mean, with running back, all the running backs gone, I mean, if anything happens to Charles, Nal Davis is a must own.
Gotta get now if Charles gets hurt.
Right now, Davis.
That's a good nickname.
He's a young guy, too. A lot of people think now Davis isn't that young. He's still very young. Number 154, Ronnie Hillman. He had 434 yards with 3 touchdowns, 21 receptions for 139 yards and a touchdown in just 8 games played last year, which is pretty nice numbers. He had a 4-game stretch from October 5th through the 23rd where he had 73 carries for 343 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 10 receptions, and 74 yards. He followed that up with a game where he had 7 receptions for 47 yards and a receiving TD at New England. And he had a multi-TD game. He had 2 100-yard games with 109 versus San Diego and 100 at New York. But C.J. Anderson eventually became the number 1 back out there. I mean, Monty Ball had his chance to be the starter. Ronnie Hillman had his chance. C.J. Anderson is a monster. But if anything happened to C.J. Anderson, just like our last guy, Now Davis, if anything happened to Charles, you want him. If anything happened to C.J. Anderson, Ronnie Hillman, again, one of the best running backs to have in fantasy.
I'm hearing Monty Ball might not even be with the team after this season.
See, I actually heard Monty Ball is a sleeper as well. Now, I don't have him on this list quite yet. I might have him in the final 25. I can't remember. We'll have to see when we get there. But Ronnie Hillman is definitely the second running back you want in this offense. Number 155, Andre Williams. A guy last year who had a good season because Rashad Jennings, who is considered the starter, he got hurt. He only played in 11 games, and Andre Williams came through. It's another one of those guys that if the starter gets hurt, he's a guy you want. He had 721 yards last year with 7 touchdowns, 18 receptions for 130 yards. He had 15 or more carries 8 times, including each of his final 4 games. 8 or less carries 5 times, though. He had 2 100-yard games with 131 at Tennessee. 35 yards or less 8 times, though. Again, it's a backup. You never know what you're going to get from him. It all depends on if the running back stays healthy, the starting running back. And really, even if Rashad Jennings doesn't stay healthy, Andre Williams is going to be in the mix in this offense, just like Now Davis will be in Kansas City. Number 156, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, tight end from Tampa Bay. Another guy like it, and he was just a rookie last year, and their second-round pick had not a great season by any means, but he showed his upside. He had 21 receptions on 37 targets, 221 yards with 2 touchdowns. He only played in 9 games. He had 4 games with 1 reception and 2 games with 4 or more receptions. No more than 58 yards receiving in any game. But the 2 games he scored in, he had 3 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown versus Minnesota, and 5 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown versus Atlanta. Now, they have Brandon Myers out there for a backup tight end, and they brought over Tim Wright, who we remember from New England last year. So they have other tight ends out there, but Austin Seferian-Jenkins coming into his second year, I like the upside he showed last year, and with a better quarterback in Jameis Winston, they got the good receivers out there to open up space for him. I think Seferian-Jenkins is another one of those sleeper tight ends.
His name's too long.
ASJ, man. Number 157, Doug Baldwin, wide receiver from Seattle.
Never been big on Doug Baldwin.
No,
not hating on him. I'm just not
But
really
listen,
a fan.
he ended up as one of the top 32 wide receivers in fantasy last season. Now, I don't have him ranked like that again this season because they brought in Jimmy Graham, of course.
Who's a better wide receiver than everybody on that team, and
Yeah,
he's a tight
please
end.
believe. And I don't expect Doug Baldwin to necessarily repeat what he did last season. He had 66 receptions on 98 targets, 825 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He led the team in receptions, targets, and yards. In the 11 weeks following Seattle's trade of Percy Harvin, Baldwin hauled in 50 passes for 638 yards with 3 TDs. So when he was the number 1 receiver, man, he was producing. He had 4 receptions or less through the first 5 weeks with a high of 56 yards in that span. But then he had 5 or more receptions 6 times with all 3 of his TDs over the final 11 weeks. 2 100-yard games with 7 catches for 123 yards and a touchdown at St. Louis. 7 catches for 113 yards at Arizona. But here's the thing about him. He's a number 1 receiver because he's listed as the number 1, but he's not fast. He's 5'10", and he's just a possession receiver. So you're not going to get the big plays from him. But he's still the second best target out there in Seattle, so he still has his upside there. I think Jimmy Graham's going to take more targets away from Baldwin in the end, though.
Definitely. Block you, Baldwin.
Number 158, Cameron Artis-Payne, running back from
Cap.
Carolina.
Salute you, Cap.
He was the 5th round pick in this year's draft for Carolina. He's 5'10", 220 pounds. He's compared to a Trey Mason. Now let's not forget, D'Angelo Williams is gone. Jonathan Stewart is the number 1 running back out there now. But Carolina has always run 2 running backs. Yep. And I think Cameron Artis-Payne has the best chance to be the 2nd running back. I mean, they have Fozzie Whitaker and they have Jordan Todman. I mean, Todman showed some spurts. I think, was it Jacksonville last year? I believe it was. I mean, he's an okay running back, but Cameron Artis-Payne, they brought this guy in. He's a rookie. I think he's going to get a shot to be the guy that splits time with Jonathan Stewart. Although I think Stewart is going to be a pretty good running back this season himself.
Carolina running backs, and I'm not hating on them, they just always seem to get hurt. One of the two. It's weird.
That's probably why they run 2 running backs. Number 159, Jeff Janis, wide receiver from Green Bay. He was the 7th round pick in the 2014 draft. He had 2 catches for 16 yards last season. But Jordy Nelson, he's done for the season, obviously. Randall Cobb steps in as the number 1. Devontae Adams, the number 2. Behind that, there isn't much. I mean, it's either going to be Jeff Janis, Miles White, or rookie Ty Montgomery. So, I mean, the early talks are Jeff Janis is going to step in and be that guy. We'll have to see. I mean, this isn't a definitive pick here. I mean, you want to take him and then keep listening to what Green Bay's doing and maybe drop him and pick something else up, or pick up Miles White and Ty Montgomery if they're still out there. Whoever they turn to as the 3rd wide receiver, I pick up in fantasy because they're probably going to be useful in some way or another in Green Bay's offense.
Green Bay loves to throw it. Obviously, Nelson's gone. That's going to bump everybody up 1. It's worth taking a risk, I guess. 159.
Yeah, why not? I mean, at this point, if we're in a 10-team draft, you said we have 15 rounds. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe it's 16, but I mean, this would be one of the very last picks of the draft, or the draft would already be over at this point. But number 160, Jameis Winston, quarterback from Tampa Bay. 1st overall pick in this year's draft. He has a lot of weapons around him, I believe, and Mike Evans, Vincent Jackson, ASJ. That's the big 3 targets. Like I said, Safarian Jenkins is going to be involved in this offense this season. These guys are all huge. I think they're all 6'5", so Winston has huge targets around him. And if they can get going in this passing game, it should help the running game, and a better running game will help the passing game. This team could be a little bit better this season, and that's why you take a chance on Jameis Winston late in this draft.
Maybe a bye week quarterback?
Possibly. Man, I've seen a lot of rookie quarterbacks turn into starters for people real quick, though. Recently, not back in the day. Number 161, the only guy on this list to make a 2nd appearance.
He's so good, he's on there twice.
Martavis Bryant, wide receiver from Pittsburgh. I had him ranked in high 70s, mid 70s, something like that. Actually, a lot of people probably thought that was a little low for him. I don't think in PPR he's going to have a ton of catches, though. That's his one downside. And now his other downside, he's suspended for 4 games because he's a pothead. But that's okay. Listen, he'll still be good when he comes back. But I'm not going to draft him too early. This is one of the guys I'm going to take late and let sit for 4 games on my bench. And if I miss out on him and somebody else grabs him, fine. I'll try to find somebody else during the season that can turn into a fantasy starter for me. I mean, you see it every year. Waiver pickups, you find a bunch of guys who come out of nowhere and are good. And while somebody's holding Martavis Bryant for 4 weeks, you can look for those guys. Or you could draft Martavis Bryant, and if you find one of those guys, drop Bryant and then pick him up. But there is still a reason to draft Bryant late in this draft.
Yeah, he missed 6 games last year and still had 8 touchdowns, so he's only missing 4.
Right. But he was very inconsistent last year, too. I mean, I'm not going to run down through his numbers here or anything, but he either had a very big game or you really didn't see him out there.
Martavis. Save the herb for after football, buddy.
Number 162, Roy Halu, running back from Oakland. He had 216 yards and a touchdown, but he had 42 receptions for 477 yards and 2 touchdowns in 14 games played. Now, this was as Alfred Morris's backup in Washington. This guy, I like him in the passing game. Obviously, he's in Oakland now, so Derek Carr has to find a way to use his running backs in the passing game for Halu to be valuable in any way. But this guy, look, 4 4 or more receptions 6 times last year. He had 40 or more yards receiving 8 times, with 5 catches for 78 yards versus the Giants. There's 12 points for you. 6 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown versus Tampa Bay. There's 17 points for you. 4 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown at Indy. There's 16 points for you. So you could see when you use him in the passing game, he has a lot of high upside in fantasy. It's just he's inconsistent as well because he's not a starting running back, and the quarterback got to get him the ball. But if you look in Oakland last season, running backs Marcel Reese, who was their fullback, and Darren McFadden, who used to be their running back, combined for 73 receptions last season for 477 yards and a touchdown. Latavius Murray had 17 receptions. Jones-Drew had 11 receptions. So there's almost 100 receptions out of their running backs. I think Halu's going to take most of those, although Marcel Reese is used in the passing game too. A fullback used in the passing game is a very nice thing to have.
Believe that.
But Halu should be Marcel Reese and Halu getting the most receptions in the passing game this season, I believe, out of their running backs in Oakland.
Were all the targets to the running backs a product of Carr being inexperienced?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, the targets could go down. Listen, this Halu pick could be a bust. I mean, he might not even come close to what he did in Washington last year, and he was a fringe player then. So, I mean, this could be a bust pick, or who knows? I mean, if Latavius Murray can't last the full season, he still has to last the full season. Trent Richardson's garbage, so it's Roy Halu's the next guy, in my opinion, and he has some upside. Number 163, Cole Beasley, wide receiver from Dallas.
Cole Beasley.
He had 37 receptions on 49 targets last year, 420 yards with 4 touchdowns. He had a multi-TD game. All 4 of his touchdowns came in the final 6 weeks of the season. He had a season high of 66 yards, though, so he really didn't come up with the big games. He had 41 or more yards in 5 of his last 6 games, though. So him and Tony Romo started to get on the same page. And really, Terrence Williams had the big early part of the season. Cole Beasley was a more reliable target for Tony Romo because he runs shorter routes, and he's not just a guy you whip the ball 50 yards downfield to. And really, right now, he's their number 3 receiver. It's still Terrence Williams on the other side, and he's very inconsistent. So Cole Beasley could turn into somewhat of a consistent receiver for you, albeit not huge games.
I don't know. I don't think Dallas's offense is going to be that great. Not hating on the pick here at 163 or anything. I just hate Dallas.
Oh, these are all upside and downside. I mean, no one here is just pure upside without the downside, man. There's a lot of downside with these picks. Number 164, there's a lot of downside with this pick, too. Denard Robinson, running back from Jacksonville.
D-Rob.
He looked good last year when he took over the starting role. Had 582 yards with 4 touchdowns. Had 23 receptions for 124 yards in 13 games played. Had 9 carries or less in each of his first 6 games. And then he had double digits in each of his final 7 games with all 4 of his TDs in that span. Had 1 multi-TD game and 2 100-yard games. Had 127 and a touchdown versus Cleveland, 108 versus Miami. Also had 94 and a touchdown at Cincinnati. But they brought in TJ Yeldon. They expect him to be the starting running back out there. Toby Gerhardt's out there still. I'm sure nobody expects him to take the starting role again. And Bernard Pierce was a decent running back for Baltimore, albeit not a beast or anything, so he could get some carries as well. But if TJ Yeldon isn't the guy they believe he is, Denard Robinson, I would believe, gets the next chance because he showed last year he has high upside. The downside, he might not get that chance.
His elbow might break off.
But a better season from Blake Bortles would help whoever is the running back this year as well. Number 165, Buffalo Bills defense. They were 4th in yards against last year with 312.2, 3rd in pass yards against with 214.2, 11th in rushing yards against with 106.4. They were 4th in points allowed with 18.1 per game. 1st in sacks, they had 54 sacks on the season. 6th in interceptions with 19, although they didn't return any for touchdowns. And they were 10th in fumble recoveries with 11, returning one of those for touchdowns. They were a very good defense last season, and there's a good chance they are even better this year.
Mario Williams, Marcellus Darius, Red Bryant, Aaron Williams, Quentin Groves. How can you not be good? Rex Ryan's up there in Buffalo
that's the
now.
thing. Rex Ryan's up there.
Specialist.
I mean, you've seen him turn the Jets defense into some pretty good
The
defenses
Jets,
in his
they
day.
had Mark Sanchez at quarterback and made it to an AFC Championship
please
game.
believe.
So
So
Rex
Buffalo's
Ryan knows
defense-
defense.
I mean, how many defense went off the board so far? 2. So this is the 3rd defense, I believe. So yeah, I'm pretty
the
high on
draft's
Buffalo's
over.
defense.
We don't even draft defenses at the spread. We just wait.
Well, listen, man, this is for a 12-team league or even 16-team leagues. If you're in a 6-team league, I mean, you got to draft your defenses way earlier. You know what I mean? You're obviously.
I don't even draft defenses. I wait till the last round. I just take what's
Yeah, but
there,
obviously,
play matchups.
if you're in a 6-team league, this round isn't going to occur. So you
Exist.
have to, yeah, exactly. So you have to draft them a little earlier than 165. We're like 65. Number 166, another defense. St. Louis Rams defense. They were 17th in yards against with 351.6 per game. 19th in passing yards against with 241.3 per game. 14th in rushing yards against with 110.3 per game. 16th in points allowed with 22.1 per game. 13th in sacks with 40. 18th in interceptions with 13. 3rd in interception TDs, though, with 3. And 6th in fumble recoveries with 12. None of those for touchdowns. Now, a lot of people thought this was the number 1 defense to have going into last fantasy season, and everyone was high on this defense. And maybe, I mean, they weren't terrible last year by any means, but I think they're going to take another step up this year and prove that what people thought of them last year is for real.
Well, they added Nick Fairley to an already strong D-line with Chris Long and Aaron Donald on it, so you're not going to be able to run the ball at all against the Rams. They're going to force you into passing situations, force you into 3rd and longs, and they're going to take advantage of it. They got a shot at making the playoffs out in the NFC, I truly believe. I think they can compete with Arizona right now.
In Seattle, why not? They got to take a step back sometime, right?
I hate Seattle.
Number 167, Daniel High on Heron, running back from Indianapolis.
Yeah, how come he didn't get suspended?
351 yards and a touchdown, 21 receptions for 173 yards and no touchdowns in the passing game. He had 8 carries through his first 5 games, 14 carries over the next 4 games, and then he had 56 carries over the final 6 games. So you can see he was becoming more and more involved in the run game as the season went along, mostly because Trent Richardson was garbage. Ahmad Bradshaw was a pretty good running back for him last season, though. But he's not with the team anymore. I think he's a free agent still. Am I correct on that?
I think so.
Somebody needs to sign that guy so you can draft Ahmad Bradshaw around here, too, late in the draft. But they brought in Frank Gore. Obviously, he's the number 1 running back out there. So there's a question of how much time Heron's going to get in the backfield. But, I mean, he does have some upside. If anything happened to Gore, there's no saying Gore's going to stay healthy and produce in Indianapolis. I mean, I do like him. But if in the off chance it doesn't happen for him, Heron could be the guy that steps in and is that feature back. And let's not forget, Ahmad Bradshaw had 38 receptions for 300 yards and 6 touchdowns last year out of the backfield for Indy. So somebody got to take that role too, and that could be Heron as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing Gore's going to get a lot of carries out there. I think they're going to run the ball more, basically, in Indianapolis. And Gore's an old guy. He could easily get hurt, and Heron take that number 1 job. It's a prolific offense out there in Indy.
Number 168, Malcolm Floyd, wide receiver from San Diego. He had 52 receptions for a team-leading 856 yards last season and 6 touchdowns. He had a 100-yard game with 5 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown at Oakland. He also had 98 yards at Buffalo. He either had 3 or 4 receptions in all but 3 games. Those other 3 games, he had 0 receptions, 2 receptions, and 5 receptions. So he's not a guy that's going to have huge games in terms of receptions, but he is a big play guy. I mean, he does go deep, and you can open the field up with Malcolm Floyd, even though he's not the youngest guy still. I mean, he's 34. He'll turn 34 in early September. But look, he had 50 or more yards receiving 10 times. And he played in 16 games last season, which he usually doesn't do. In fact, he's only done that twice over the last 11 seasons, one of those last year. But look, Keenan Allen, he led the team in targets. I think he's going to be the number 1 receiver out there, and he's going to have a better year. I think Stevie Johnson's going to overtake Malcolm Floyd as Phillip Rivers' secondary target out of the wide receivers, while Antonio Gates is that guy once he comes back from his 4-game suspension.
Melvin Gordon will help out in the backfield. some of them safeties are going to have to come up. It'll be a little easier for Floyd to get over the top.
Number 169, Charles Clay, tight end from Buffalo this year. He had a pretty decent season last year. 58 receptions on 84 targets, 605 yards and 3 touchdowns. Played in 14 games with Miami. Had 5 or more receptions 6 times. But he also had 2 or less 4 times. He did have a 100-yard game with 6 catches for 114 yards versus Minnesota. He had 41 or more yards receiving in 7 of his final 9 games played. He should be more inconsistent with Castle and Manuel, though. I mean, Tannehill was a pretty good quarterback last season. He was one of his main targets. This year it's going to be either Castle or Manuel, so he's going to be more inconsistent, and that's why I have him so low on the list. I mean, he still has upside because he's a good tight end, but I just don't trust him to put up fantasy numbers week in and week out in Buffalo. He also injured his knee in practice Tuesday, so you got to pay attention to his status moving forward. We'll have to see. Number 170, Josh Hill, tight end from New Orleans. Ben Watson is actually listed as the starter right now, but I see a guy that is 34 years old and had 20 receptions last season, 2 touchdowns, and I really don't think that guy's going to keep the starting job. Josh Hill's a younger guy, just 25. Now, he didn't do much last season, 14 receptions for 176 yards, but he did find the end zone, 5 touchdowns, so he is a red zone target, and I think he'll eventually take over the starting role at tight end with Jimmy Graham gone. Obviously, there's a lot of targets to go around that Jimmy Graham took up last season, and I see no reason why Josh Hill can't be a guy that takes some of those. Number 171, the New York Jets defense. They were 6th in yards allowed last season with 327.2 per game, 14th in passing yards allowed with 234.1 per game, 5th in rushing yards allowed with 93.1 per game. They were 24th in points allowed, though, with 25.1 yards per game. But we know their defense got better this season, obviously. And last year, they were 6th in sacks with 45, yet they were last in interceptions with 6, although they did return 2 of those for touchdowns. And they were 22nd in fumble recoveries with 7 and returned none of those for touchdowns. So the numbers aren't necessarily great right there, but they did bring in some pieces, and I think the Jets' defense should be a lot better this season.
Well, when you add Darrell Revis and Antonio Cromartie to your defensive backfield,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
a guy like Leonard Williams to a defensive line
Beast
that's
mode.
already good, and they got Todd Bowles up from Arizona, who took a defense that didn't really have any great players and made them a great defense for that that season. It's the sky's the limit for the Jets defense right now. I really think they're going to be a force, although their offense.
Well,
With
that
Geno
hurts
out,
the
that
defense
might
too,
help.
because I mean, if an offense isn't moving the ball, that puts the defense out there more often in worse situations. So that could hurt the defense as well, and it's a reason they're not higher on the list, I guess. But the Jets defense, they're going to be pretty good this season.
Solid gold.
Number 172, Miami Dolphins defense. They were 12th in yards allowed last season with 343.4 yards per game. 6th in passing yards allowed, though, with 222.3 yards per game. However, they were 24th in rushing yards allowed with 121.1 per game. 20th in points allowed with 23.3 per game. 16th in sacks with 39. 14th in interceptions with 14. None returned for touchdowns. 10th in fumble recoveries with 11, with 1 return for a touchdown. But again, this is another defense that is expected to have a better season this year.
The Dolphins, they added Ndamukong Suh to their defensive line. I don't know. They're
Well,
going to
listen,
be
man.
good, but they're just that team. They got Cameron Wake, a Brent Grimes, but they don't have these great names. They're just a good, solid defense with a good scheme. They play well together, so they produce on the field. They're just not somebody who has all these superstars like freaking the Jets do nowadays.
Not necessarily, but I mean, you look, man, they were already 6th in passing yards allowed last season, so they had a pretty good secondary. Their problem was against the run. They couldn't stop anybody from running the ball. You bring in Ndamukong Suh, I mean, that should help shore up your run. So if you can do what you did last season against the pass and improve this run game, all these other categories, they're going to go up in the rankings as well. Number 173, Marcus Mariota, quarterback from Tennessee. He was the 2nd overall pick in this year's draft.
The new Eminem.
He should be able to rack up some solid rushing yards, if nothing else. We'll have to see how he
Yep.
works in the passing game. But, I mean, Kendall Wright, he's a guy that can come up with the big play. They brought over Harry Douglas from Atlanta. This is a guy that had some big games in Atlanta with Matt Ryan when either Julio Jones or Roddy White was hurt. They drafted Dorial Green Beckham, who can be a big play guy at one point. We'll have to see if it's this season or not. And they still have Justin Hunter. They have a good tight end in Delaney Walker. And we'll have to figure out their run game still. I mean, they have Sankey, Cobb, and Andrews. Who knows who's going to end up being the starting running back by the end of the season there. But, I mean, he has some okay weapons, if nothing else. It all depends. Can Green Beckham step up and become an elite receiver this season? That would really help Mariota in the long run, I believe. But he has some upside because he can run the ball, and maybe he can make these receivers better as well.
He's definitely the more mobile between him and Winston, so I was a little shocked that you had Winston higher, although Winston has the better weapons around
Yeah, I
him.
think, that's the whole point. Winston got those weapons around him. I mean, he has one of the best receivers in the game in Mike Evans. He has another very good receiver that's been good for a long time in Vincent Jackson.
Vinny Jack.
Where, I mean, you could say Kendall Wright hasn't proven himself yet. Harry Douglas, I mean, he was never really a starter. You laugh at Harry Douglas.
Every time. I can't help it.
So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely about the weapons out there. Number 174, Brian Hartline, wide receiver from Cleveland. The first Cleveland receiver on the list at number 174.
I'm surprised any Cleveland receivers are on the list. Where's Terrell Pryor at?
Yeah, he would not show up on the list.
Ah.
But Hartline, he had 39 receptions on 63 targets last year, 474 yards and 2 touchdowns in Miami. He wasn't the number one receiver out there. His best game was the last game of the season. He had 5 receptions for 95 yards. He had 2 receptions or less 9 times. 3 games with 0 receptions. But like I said, he wasn't really the number 1, number 2 target out there. This year, I mean, it's with Cleveland, Dwayne Bowe. I don't think he's going to be the number 1 target out there. They got Andrew Hawkins. Who else they got out there? They have
Terrell
pretty much
Pryor,
nothing.
man.
He's not going to be the number 1 target out
Why
there.
not?
Please.
Dude's beast.
So listen, Hartline, he's the number 1 receiver in Cleveland, I believe. So, I mean, there's his upside right there. You're getting a number 1 receiver at the back end of the draft, and who knows from there.
I'm going to play Terrell Pryor as my defense.
Number 175, Fred Jackson, running back from Buffalo. He led the team last year with 525 yards and 2 touchdowns, had 66 receptions, and also had 501 yards receiving with a receiving TD in 14 games played. Boobie Dixon, he had 432 yards rushing last year. Spiller had 300 yards rushing last year. Bryce Brown had 126 yards rushing last year. So there's a lot of rushing yardage there, along with what Fred Jackson put up, that mostly going to go to LaShawn McCoy. But look, McCoy's not going to be a every down back completely. I mean, he's still going to be a beast running back, hopefully. But Fred Jackson, I mean, he works well in the passing game. Like I said, 66 receptions last year. This guy's still going to be used in the passing game out there. And he's going to get some rushing yardage as well. So I think this is a solid back end of the draft running back to take as well.
Listen,
and who knows, if McCoy doesn't turn out to be 100% healthy by the beginning of the season, Fred Jackson could be a great guy to have in the first game or two if McCoy isn't at 100%.
And let's face it, Rex Ryan loves to run the football. I mean, he's literally run the ball 50-plus times in a game when his quarterbacks were terrible, and he has no quarterbacks. He has E.J. Manuel, Tyrod Taylor, and I don't even remember the other guy who's competing for a job. So they're going to get the rock.
Smith.
Yeah, I always like Fred Jackson
Buffalo.
more than I like
Oh,
C.J.
wait, never
Spiller
mind.
out there. And really, I mean, this is definitely the second running back in this system. And outside of Watkins and McCoy, I mean, I could see Fred Jackson getting a big chunk of playing time because, I mean, they have Percy Harvin out there as the number 2 receiver right now. That's very scary. As you can tell, I didn't even have Percy Harvin on our list yet. You'll hear him in the next segment. I don't believe Percy Harvin is the type of receiver
He's
he used to
washed
be.
up. Yeah, he's done. His hips beat.
But that's it, man.
That's all we got. Number 175 ends it for this segment. Bless you, 47. Thank you, fans, for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread. You can follow me on Twitter at betjimthewin. Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/betthespread. Keep coming back to YouTube. Keep clicking subscribe. I'm about to pass out because I've had a sinus infection and I don't have enough air in my lungs.